can you name the 5 Great Lakes? Well, let's see. There's Huron, there's Ontario, there's Michigan, there's Erie, and there's
Superior.
one. Superior. Thank you. Actually, that voice you heard was author Wayne Grady, and he's in the studio today, and we're going to talk about the book that he's written, The Great Lakes. Wayne, welcome. Do we as a population really understand what is happening?
I don't think so, and that was, as I say, one of the reasons I wrote this book, is that there are so many things going on in the lakes now that I think people are unaware of, and ought to be aware of, because there's some quite disturbing things going on with the lakes and with the way we're treating the lakes. As I say, 40 million people living around the lakes. They're drawing water out of the lakes. They're pumping pollution back into the lakes. They're taking water and putting things into the water and returning it to the water at different temperatures, different composition. That's one thing. So there's pollution that's affecting the lakes. I think we sort of know about pollution. We might think that it's all taken care of now because we stopped polluting, and we have by and large, and certainly not the way we were 20 or 30 years ago. But all the pollution we put in 20 or 30 years ago and before that is still in the lakes. It hasn't flushed out. When I first started writing this book, I thought, oh well, you know, it's flushed out. The lakes are clean again. But in fact, all that pollution, it would take 800 years for the lakes to flush themselves out. So because there's so much water there. So all of that, whatever goes into the lakes is there for a long time. So all of that pollution is still there. It's merely settled into the bottom. And so it's not in the water so much anymore, but it is in the mud and the sediments at the bottom of the lakes. And that's becoming more of a problem. In a way, it's okay to be sequestered down there because we're not drinking it, and it's not killing fish and things like that. But as another problem that's affecting the lake, which is global warming, is increasing the rate of evaporation. The surface of the lake is always evaporating huge amounts of water, and that water is being put back in. The water evaporates. It goes into clouds, it rains, the rains fall on the ground, the water runs back into the lakes. But what's happening now with global warming, the surface of the lakes is warming up so much that it's evaporating far more rapidly than it can be replaced. So the levels of the lakes are going down.
So we're losing.
So we're losing water. Right now the lakes are about 1.5 feet lower than they have historically been for the past 100 years at this time of year. And that's a very significant drop. For one thing, just as from an economic point of view, with the lakes 1.5 feet lower, it means that ships that are traveling on the lakes and carrying cargo can't go full load because they can't get through the canals, which didn't have 1.5 feet clearance. The canals are about 27 feet deep, but the ships take a 26-foot drop. So if they're fully laden, they can't get through the canals anymore. So I've heard that most ships on the canal now are only loading about 90% capacity. So that means shipping costs are going up by 10%, at least 10%. They have to take 10% more trips to carry the same amount of cargo. They're burning 10% more fuel, putting 10% more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, increasing the rate of global warming, etc. So there's that loop that's happening. But the other effect of lowered lake levels is that around the edges of the lakes, when the water goes down, it exposes all of that sediment that was under the lakes is now exposed to the air, and it's all full of the pollution that has settled into the sediments. So all this is exposed, it dries out, the wind comes and blows it away, blows it around, and it gets into the air, and so it becomes air pollution. So pollution is a problem that's still with us. Global warming is lowering the lake levels at a faster than expected pace. The other problem is that that I wasn't aware of, I had no idea of this when I started writing the book, is the rate at which non-indigenous species are entering the lakes. Just how many new species are coming in and getting into the lakes, largely in the ballast tanks of freighters that come in from Europe, from the Baltic Sea. They fill their ballast tanks in the Baltic Sea or in the Caspian Sea in Europe, and then critters get into their ballast tanks. They get into the Great Lakes, before they take on a load here, they empty their ballast tanks in the lake. So all of the critters that got in Europe are now in the Great Lakes, and there are now over 185 species, non-indigenous species in the Great Lakes.
So this is how our zebra mussels arrived here,
Zebra mussels
correct?
are the most famous example. Yeah,
Yes.
Zebra mussels and quagga mussels are now the two bivalves, the two mollusks that are taking over the ecosystem on the bottoms of the lakes and forcing out the native mollusks that are down there. Right now, about 50% of the fish biomass of the Great Lakes, by weight, is a fish called the round goby, which is a fish from the Baltic Sea that grows to about 4 inches as an adult. So a 4-inch fish that has only been in the lakes for 10 years has proliferated to the extent where it now accounts for 50% of all the fish biomass in the lakes. So that's a huge, huge number of fish. And I could go on. I mean, there are 185 of those species that are coming in all the time.
But how do we solve a problem like that, though, Wayne?
Well, one of the things we could regulate, make regulations that ships cannot empty their ballast tanks in the Great Lakes. So they have to empty them before they get into the lakes. It's sort of like asking someone to take their shoes off before they come into your house. Right? I mean, I mean, I know it's not that easy, but that's about the only thing you can do. I mean, you can't. They have to have ballast to get it. If they're coming back empty, I mean, I guess they're coming back empty because of Canada's balance of trade, right? We're shipping out more stuff than we're bringing back. So if we regulated the balance of trade, they come back with cargo instead of having to fill their ballast tanks. But they're not. That's not going to happen soon, I don't think. So. And they have to come, if they're coming back empty or half laden, they have to have ballast or else they can't get across the ocean.
Right.
So, but they could empty their ballast tanks in the St. Lawrence, in the Gulf of St. Lawrence or in the St. Lawrence River before they come into the lakes. And they could even empty them in one part of the river and then fill them up again a couple of miles upstream with water that comes from the Great Lakes that doesn't have foreign species in it.
So what you're telling me is that there is a solution. There is a solution to this. It just has to be done.
It has to be put into law. Yeah. Right now we sort of ask them to do that, and most of them do, I think. But the ones that don't are the ones that are bringing in these non-indigenous
Or just adding
species.
to the destruction
at
of the
the
lakes.
rate of about one new species every 8 months is coming in. So it's an ongoing problem, and they're taking over, and it's ousting species that have been in the lakes, as I say, for the last 14,000 years. We're losing species to these new ones that are coming in and taking over the food chain.
Wayne Grady's book, The Great Lakes, The Natural History of a Changing Region, is available at bookstores everywhere.